downfall of the Soviet Union, Moscow's military museum preserves what one might call the relics of the country's former might. The country's military is very low in morale and even lower in money. But the strategic nuclear forces are anything but museum pieces. And thousands of missiles are still ready and waiting. Russia's nuclear missiles are deployed at some 20 sites scattered across the country's vast spaces. Until today, the missile bases have been highly secret, sealed off from outsiders. But Nova has gained access to Russia's largest missile base, the heart of the nation's nuclear force. This is the township of Svetly. In Russian, it means bright. Situated some 500 miles southeast of Moscow, Svetly was built 25 years ago, and ever since then has been the country's #1 strategic nuclear missile base. Over that past quarter of a century, there have been stupendous changes in Russia, but not here. As always, twice a week, a replacement squad of missileers, in Russian called raketchiki, heads out to 20 remote launch control centers. From underground bunkers, they will command 200 missiles buried in silos. This is the hidden world of the raketchiki, the underground tunnels leading to the missile launch centers. For decades, Russia's missileers have watched over the nation's nuclear arsenal, ceaselessly checking the readiness of the missiles under their control. And every time they go on duty, they await the ultimate order to turn the keys and launch nuclear devastation.
Внимание, второй получен приказ на пост.
This is the nuclear punch of Russia's biggest missile base, the Topol-M. A squadron of 30 Topol-Ms is based around Svetly. Designed to be fired from either a mobile launcher or a silo, the Topol has a range of over 6,000 miles and the destructive power of 35 Hiroshima bombs. Incidentally, Topol means poplar tree in Russian. Heaven forbid having to rest in its shade. 22-year-old Lieutenant Yevgeny Pavlov is an extremely bright and likable young man who could have chosen a much more financially rewarding career than that of missileer. To join the raketchiki, he left behind a passion for action sports and a girlfriend.
My girlfriend. My mother wanted that I will become a doctor, but I'll say never. And my dreams at school was to become a Russian officer. And that's why now I'm a Russian officer.
Once upon a time, Russians enlisted in the armed forces because of the advantages offered over civilian life. Higher pay, more available homes, good school and good hospital facilities, and of course, the status, the respect. That is no longer the case for all of the Army, with one exception, the Strategic Missile Forces.
Время работы резервных источников питания на контроль. Есть.
In a missile launch simulator on the base, Colonel Yuri Petrovsky is training Lieutenant Pavlov and other young raketchiki. Colonel Petrovsky arrived here when Lieutenant Pavlov was born, 22 years ago. Then it seemed that nuclear war was just around the corner and the enemy was at the gates.
Да, в свое время идеология, которая и нам доводилась,
At that time, the ideology that was fed to us,
можно сказать,
you could say it shaped my view of the world, that the enemy is across the sea.
океаном имеется враг. Сейчас
Now I understand there is no enemy as such.
то как такового врага нету. Вот. Ну, может
But
быть,
in my
где-то
old brain cells,
старых
maybe some of that remains.
осталось что-то. О, Наталья!
Colonel Petrovsky and his wife Natalia, a teacher at one of the local schools, have recently moved into a bigger apartment on the base. Their daughter and her husband often come to visit them from the nearby city of Saratov, where they're studying. Both the colonel and his wife are staunch supporters of life on the base.
Здесь, в городке,
Life here in the town is unique, odd.
тоже весело,
It's also cheerful, interesting, and unusual.
но своеобразно. Вот. Я бы сказал, что в городке
I would say that things are more orderly here than in a big
чем
city.
где-то в большом городе.
It's better for
Для
children.
детей лучше. Потому что в городах они могут попасть.
In big cities, they can fall in with bad company. There are drugs. Here, we don't have things like that. And what do we live for? We live for our children, for the family.
Для семьи это, в принципе, нормально.
Just outside Svetly Base lies the village of Tatishevo. It has the same population as Svetly, but that's all they have in common. There are few jobs here and little money. Tatishevo is what the reality of post-communist Russia looks like, a country where economic woes and social disintegration have slashed the average male life expectancy to just 59 years. Within the gates of Svetly Base, the world is very different. This is more than just a military base. It's a town of 20,000, complete with 3 public schools, sports facilities, a cultural center, a hospital. It is a closed town. It's not open to anyone. It's off limits for those who don't live here, and it is privileged. The registration of new babies on the base is a special occasion.
Прошу вас пройти на свои места.
The champagne, music, and dancing are just some of the signs that life here is very different.
Raincoat, pajamas,
The schools would make Moscow envious.
jeans, t-shirt, slippers, sweater, boots, tie.
The kids seem confident, happy, and secure. But while life on the base is certainly better than in most of Russia, by Western standards, it would have to be called a hard and often bleak existence.
Let me say that a colonel who is responsible for warheads equal to all nuclear potential of Great Britain, he receives less than $60 a month. So, but believe me that 2 years ago the situation was even worse. They did not receive even this small salary.
Even in Russia, it's not a big money. And a few years ago, Russian officers were permitted to have a few days on leave in order to raise money, as a gypsy cab drivers, for instance.
I don't know why, but they have their own ideology. And I asked this question to myself a lot of times. Why people are serving in such difficult conditions, but they are serving and they are thinking about defense of their motherland. And it looks rather interesting in Russia, where from time to time you think that no one believes to anything.
The continuing faith of the people stationed here at Russia's biggest missile base has to do in part with the traditional privileges which almost always underlie traditional loyalties. But for Russia's elite missileers, Svetly offers something more.
The biggest part of funding is located there. You can see the best barrack rooms, the best recreation centers, and people there are very enthusiastic because they are working with the newest missile system in Russia, Topol-M, and this experience will play a crucial role in their future career.
General Yuri Kavelin is the base commander. He was a construction worker, then joined the army and progressed through the ranks of the strategic missile forces. He now commands 6,000 raketchiki and 2,500 military support forces. He knows exactly how things stand with the troubled Russian military. But he has no doubt about the morale of the raketchiki.
Ракетные войска – это особый мир.
The missile forces are a special world, a special world.
Вот он изначально как создан на заре становления ракетных войск.
It's a world which, from the creation of the missile forces, was based on the best traditions of the Russian army and the best officers.
Ведь они создавались.
At the beginning, we had tank, navy, and air force officers, the best officers of the Russian army, and we continue this tradition until today.
И эти традиции, они продолжаются до сегодняшних дней.
Вы знаете, отец мне всегда говорил, всегда.
My father used to say, someone always has to start the process of changing things.
Мы все пришли в училище, наши командиры.
When we arrived at military college, our commanding officers started to train us as the people who have to show the world a new army.
Содержание нашей армии. То есть, я думаю, наше поколение.
I think our generation is going to change the army so that it will be respected again as it was in the past.
Былое уважение.
Russia's missiles are test-fired several times a year to check their readiness.
In spite of today's problems, we have managed to preserve our stability, flexibility, and war readiness.
С другой стороны,
However, there is a problem of weapons aging fast. The aging of our missiles demands constant attention.
внимательное отношение к нему.
Расчет по местам. Есть по местам.
Russia's maintenance crews are fighting to keep their missiles in service. Russia's weapons are often simpler and less prone to break down than Western armaments, like the Kalashnikov submachine gun, which functions in any conditions. But a nuclear missile is not a Kalashnikov, and the effects of aging can be disturbing.
Right now, we have about 6,000 strategic nuclear warheads ready to go, but it's obvious that in the coming years, the number is going to be decreased because a lot of the missiles that are today in operation are old ones, going up to about more than 20 years old, sitting in silos for more than 20 years, and soon they'll have to be scrapped.
It's more or less clear that something is going on within these missiles which serves 20 or even more years. Fortunately, until now, we have no any incidents and accidents with these missiles, but God knows what can happen in nearest future.
I think that given the terrible situation with Russian economy and terrible conditions with Russian military, it's a miracle that nothing happened during the last 10 years after the Soviet collapse. However, unfortunately, it shouldn't be considered as a precedent that nothing happened in the future.
The problems of Russia's aging missiles come to a focus here at the command center of the Strategic Missile Forces, just outside Moscow. I met the Commander-in-Chief, Four-Star General Vladimir Yakovlev.
С глубины этого зала виден весь земной шар.
Это как?
Это так. Это так. То есть способность тех средств, которыми мы управляем, дает возможность увидеть любую точку на земном шаре, если в этом возникнет необходимость.
Despite General Yakovlev's confidence, all the evidence suggests that Russia's ability to monitor the planet from space is steadily deteriorating. On at least 2 occasions, false alarms brought the Russians to within minutes of ordering a full-scale nuclear strike. In September 1983, a Soviet base received a satellite warning that 5 ballistic missiles were heading their way. The satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off clouds for the fiery plumes of ICBMs. The world was spared only because of the brave hunch of a single Russian officer. In January 1995, Russian radar picked up the signal of a rocket which seemed to be heading toward Russia from an area patrolled by U.S. Trident submarines. The alert spread all the way up the chain of command to President Yeltsin, who is said to have taken out the nuclear suitcase used to authorize an all-out strike. The alert was called off with only 2 minutes to spare. The rocket was actually a Norwegian probe designed to study the Northern Lights. Since this 1995 incident, Russia's entire early warning satellite network may have broken down, in which case it would be dependent only on ground-based radar and blind to many potential attacks.
Which means that Russian National Command authorities, they would receive information about possible missile attack at a very late stage. They know that, and it makes them more nervous, and they could much easier interpret a flight of birds as a missile attack, and as a result, the missiles could be launched.
Some experts think that the major missile base at Svetly, and even Moscow itself, could be wiped out without the Russians receiving any warning. Nervous Russian military commanders have less and less information on which to base their decisions.
The problem is authorized launch launch based on misinterpretation or miscalculation, based on a wrong information. So the missiles, I doubt that they could fly by themselves. However, Stanislavski, who was a very famous Russian theater director, he said, if you have a rifle on a wall in the first act, it is a guarantee that somebody would shoot from that in the fourth act.
Какая прелесть. Какой запах.
Есть классная вещь, уха на палочку.
Это на стол ставлю.
For Colonel Petrovsky, enjoying a picnic with friends on a rare day off, there is no question that if that gun goes off, it won't be by accident. He also knows it was Anton Chekhov, not Stanislavski, who said that. The colonel told me he had never met a foreigner before our film crew, and he's never been allowed to travel outside the country. But despite these restrictions, the endless hours on duty, and the problems with pay, the colonel has no doubts about the commitment and morale of the Raketchiki.
I would describe it this way. A missileer is always on duty. If a border guard protects the frontier of the country, a missileer protects the entire country. In my youth, I was attracted by military service. I liked the idea of uniform. This was my first dream. It has come true.
Сплошной беленой, и ночь чернилами льется с вершин, и серой горной курчавой стеной весь мир на части Тяньшань раскрошил. Кто-то от нас вдалеке.
Now, Yevgeny Pavlov, a child of the new Russia, is beginning his career as a missile man with the same certainty.
Там за хребтом мир живет, мир шумит.
Быть ракетчиком.
To be a missile forces man, I think it's to guard the peace and keep the country stable.
Я думаю, это прежде всего.
Because after all, nowadays nuclear weapons are a deterrent.
Играет сейчас роль сдерживающего фактора. И поэтому пока у нас будет ядерное
So as long as we have nuclear weapons, we'll be ready to fight as we are now. It's unlikely anyone will want to challenge us.
Кто-то нам будет мешать.
But today's challenge to Russia's nuclear security lies closer to home. A string of bombings in Moscow and elsewhere has shocked the public and politicians into awareness of the mounting global threat of terrorism.
Количество нападающих до 6 человек. Вооружение стрелковое. Караул занял круговую оборону, ведет бой. Доклад закончил.
This training exercise, based on dealing with a terrorist attack, once seemed like something out of an action movie. In today's Russia, it could actually happen.
Караул занял круговую оборону, ведет бой. Приказываю вам во главе вооруженной команды убыть по маршруту движения. Командный пункт караул номер 10.
The menace of international terrorism has put the Missile Defense Forces on high alert against possible attacks on the silos.
Второй. Доложить командиру полка о нападении караула необходимости противодиверсионной группы.
Есть.
After the terrorist actions, today's exercise has an alarming relevance. And by the way, they were using live ammunition.
Товарищи офицеры, начинаем наше очередное занятие.
Before every spell of duty in the missile launch centers, the Raketchiki undergo a series of psychological tests.
Девятое.
The aim is to check their emotional state. Now, it's obvious that people with a finger on the nuclear trigger should be in full control of themselves. But I found the process somewhat bewildering.
The first test is to define personality traits, and the second is not so much a test, rather to work out biorhythms. In assessing personal traits, and everyone knows it these days, it's been proved, on the basis of a person's attitude to color, one can determine not only their emotional state, but also their qualities. As for biorhythms, a human being is influenced by various rhythms, the rhythm of the sun's movement, lunar movement, and so on. And these biorhythms, date of birth, the lunar phase at that time, the impact of the sun on the earth in that year, on that basis the biorhythms are constructed.
The psychologist said that if the biorhythms were negative, whatever that means, she would use additional tests to assess a Raketchik's fitness for duty. And I wanted to ask her if she used tarot cards. But I decided this was not the place for humor. This is essentially a man's world. Women are recruited, but only for support roles, such as communications. Unlike their American counterparts, the Raketchiki have not accepted women for the ultimate duty of commanding missiles in the launch centers, and probably never will.
In our country, any member of the rocket forces is, in the final analysis, also a commanding officer. He has subordinates, he has people he has to work with.
If he is the boss, what's his attitude to the women? I don't want to see that there's prejudice towards them, that they're offended, but it's bound to disturb things. At least it would disturb things in launch control.
And another thing, our missileers have duty periods lasting 3 to 4 days. For a woman, that's probably a bit difficult. Although our Russian women can do anything.
After all, women are programmed to preserve peace, the world around them. That's their natural foundation. Men are more programmed for destruction, for war, no matter how strange that is, no matter how sad.
Товарищ лейтенант, личный состав группы АСО для проведения занятий. Младший сержант Воронин.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Здравия желаю, товарищ лейтенант! Вольно! Садись!
These may be children of the new Russia, but their indoctrination has a decidedly old-fashioned flavor.
Тема нашего сегодняшнего занятия – ракетные войска стратегического назначения на страже Отечества. РВСН предназначена для решения задач ядерного сдерживания нападения извне, обеспечения стратегической стабильности в мире.
Учебы и в 1979 году окончили.
On their 40th anniversary, the Raketchiki commemorate their Memorial Day. Colonel Petrovsky shares the story of his early years on the base with the new missileers. It's a little education in pride and honor. But for the first time in 4 decades, there is a new ingredient: truth.
Победы в космосе, и подлинные, и мнимые, оплачивались дорогой ценой. Офицеры-ракетчики, сторожилы космодромов, помечают свою жизнь вехами аварий. Говоря об успехах, будем помнить.
In 1960, a missile exploded